Right. Thank you. Thank you. And I appreciate you, Manal, for this, for asking for this subject in particular. And it's a great question, one that's also been near and dear to my heart for a long time. And that comes up in the course of working with people who are activists or out there on the front lines. And yeah, and I appreciate you for what you wrote about it and put out in the newsletter. And I'm looking forward to digging into this. As always, I think where the real work happens is right now in the moment. So I invite everyone to take a moment to notice yourself in this moment right here. You did whatever you did, whatever you needed to do to get onto this call. Now see if you can drop distractions, quit multitasking if that's what you have been doing, and just really let yourself feel yourself from the inside. Notice the sensations in your body, the little voices in your head, any pictures that float through your mind. Breathe into your experience right now, and also look around. See my face on the screen and whatever else is going on in your environment, and just land right here, right now. And especially since it's a Saturday, I thought maybe I would open with a song that that God and I wrote kind of about this topic. I say God and I because it came in a dream. It came in a dream, and I just sort of woke up and finished it. But it's a song about how there's darkness in our lives and in our world that confronts us all the time. And somehow we have to learn to love that darkness, even be grateful for that darkness in order to not be despairing. So this song is about how to take the shit of your life and compost it so you can grow beautiful flowers with it. How to be grateful for the dark as well as the light, and even see the darkness as a path, as a way. It's autobiographical. Going through some real hard times, feeling mighty low, with no one left to turn to, and nowhere else to go. So one night before I lay me down, I kneel beside my bed. Drop down on my knees, dropped my pride and said, help me, Lord, won't you show me some sign? Help me, Lord, won't you show me some sign? Then I dreamed that I was walking out underneath the sky. Rain started pouring down, made my baby cry. I looked up at the heavens, clouds were dark and gray. But then the sunlight broke through and made me lift my voice and say, thank you, Lord. Thank you for your sunshine, but also thank you for your rain and your darkness, and for darkness giving way. Thank you, Lord, for your sunshine. Thank you for your rain and your darkness, and for darkness giving way. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Giving way. We can't grow flowers without any rain, or grow compassion without any pain. So even when it's stormy and I'm suffering, I know that the sun will break through and make me throw back my head and sing, thank you, Lord. Thank you for your sunshine, and also thank you for your rain and your darkness, but for darkness giving way. Thank you, Lord, for your sunshine. Thank you for your rain and your darkness, but for darkness, the darkness giving way. The darkness giving way. The darkness giving way. The darkness giving way. All right. Thank you for your listening. So, yeah, darkness is undeniable. You know, it can break your heart. You look around the world, you watch the news, you hear about what's going on, you look at our most recently elected president. It can be heartbreaking to look at the world and see all the economic injustice, environmental devastation, uh, social injustice, and it's very easy to either get really angry or succumb to despair. And there must be something broken about people such that we keep creating this kind of mess around us. And it's natural to want to do whatever you can to try to make it better, or to succumb to the other side of just kind of getting resigned, giving up hope, and turning your back on the whole situation. But that doesn't feel good either. And yet, sometimes when people jump into action to try to fix the problems they see in the world, their way of being while they're doing it, their way of doing is toxic in and of itself and unwittingly adding to the problem. I was talking recently in my soul purpose course about the difference between being and doing, and how most of the world is pretty addicted, at least the Western world, the American world, to what I call frantic doing. Doing which is uninspired, doing which springs as a knee-jerk reaction out of what I would call the fear of being. Whereas if you can learn what I call the art of being, then you can learn the art of doing. And the art of doing is not frantic or fearful doing, it's inspired doing. It's an act of service or love. So let's talk about how we might start to learn this art of being, and why it's even necessary. I would posit that people come into this world and cannot escape being wounded in the process. We all carry with us a wound that started very young, through some combination of the challenges of being born into our particular body and our particular circumstances and our particular families and our particular social traumas, culture. We all got hurt. So there's a wound, there's a darkness in here that most of us have spent our lives sort of trying to outrun, or using unconscious strategies to try to fix. And one of the strategies that we use to try to deal with the pain in here is what they call in the psych biz projection. We put it out there. If there's a problem or a pain or a wound in here, we do this little sleight of hand, like, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, and we shift our focus to out there, and we imagine, well, of course I'm in pain. The world is so messed up. The world is so flawed. The world is so broken. The world is so screwed up that I'm upset about it, and therefore I need to fix that problem so that I can feel at peace. And you get, frankly, a lot of activists or politicians or whatever who are basically trying to solve an internal problem with their external actions. The activist who is so angry that they end up turning off more people than they turn on, because they're acting out of their own wound without even really being aware of it. So, of course, it's not an either or situation. You can always look for your opportunities to have actions in the world, to make the world a better place, to be of service. You can, that's always available to you, and I encourage you to do it in whatever ways feel right and authentic to you. But at the same time, if you're not simultaneously taking a look inside and noticing what is the wound that I'm carrying, and how am I projecting my pain out there and avoiding it in here, then you're doing yourself and everybody else a disservice, in my humble opinion. Now, discovering the contours of that wound and how to work with it yourself is, of course, a great big subject, which I can only briefly touch upon. But through various practices like meditation or therapy, counseling, you can start to look inward and start to get to know yourself. And you can start to develop the art of what I call emotional metabolism, where you unearth these wounds, these hurts, and you start physically, emotionally, mentally feeling your way through them, experiencing them more fully in such a way that they are able to dissolve, open up, soften up, dissolve, and be released. And you start gradually lightening your karmic load, if you will. And then you start to get familiar with the specific flavor of wound that you have, because some people's wounds are very different than others. You know, some people, when they were kids, were terrorized by their parents who were calling them names or beating on them all the time or whatever. My case is the opposite. I often felt neglected or alone or left to my own devices in a way that was sad and lonely and scary, but it was a different wound than somebody else's who's, you know, being criticized or shamed all the time or something like that. So by exploration and excavation, you start to become familiar with the particular contours of your specific wound. And you start to become familiar with the specific kind of medicine needed to heal your specific wound. It's a specific kind of intervention or response, creative response to your wound that is needed. And you can start developing the capacity to do that for yourself. And you can start asking other people to be with you in that way to whatever degree they are able. And as you know from my communication work, you can also start healing your wound by going and dealing with the outer world, but not in the sense of the outer world of the whole system, but the immediate outer world of your own family, your own intimate relationships, and start to clean those up, start to complete the unfinished emotional business that you have with the significant people in your life. And that will bring healing and lighten your load. And as you get good at all this, you notice that you have a specific kind of gift, a specific kind of medicine that you have developed to heal yourself. And that very gift, that very medicine is what you can use to help heal the world. Because let's face it, we're not, you know, equally cut out to serve the world in the same ways. We each have our own unique way of being of greatest service to others. You know, for me to be a personal organizer or even a political activist, political lobbyist or something, would be not a good use of my machinery. I would not be very effective, and that would not be the best way for me to make a difference in the world. So I've developed my own unique neuroses, wounds, and gifts so that I can use my brokenness and my healing in service of the brokenness and potential healing in the world. And you will find people that resonate with you. You will find people that have similar kinds of wounds or that need similar kind of healing to what you've been needing. And then you can start working together, or you can start serving those people, or you can start forming teams that make a difference cooperatively, synergistically. And when you do that inner work and are not just trying to fix the world as a knee-jerk reaction out of fear, then basically what you're doing is spreading more love in the world. You're exercising your capacity for love. The way that you learned to love yourself, you start to learn to love others. And how that looks is very different for different people. Some people got maybe a more angry form of love. You know, they go out there and they shake people up and they make, but if they're doing that out of this, their own wound and gift, it's going to be different than just the scared and angry activist. You know, you might be Jesus kicking over the tables in the money changers' tables in the temple, or you might be a more serene Buddha figure, or you might be, you know, planting a garden and with your hands in the dirt, or you might be, you know, the world's most loving accountant who helps people who have important things to do in the world deal with their money. Who knows what it is? Who knows what your gift is, what your particular way of serving is? And there isn't a right way, there's just your way. Your way of spreading your unique flavor of love in the world. But again, that love starts at home. Not to the exclusion of being involved in the world. You might be involved in the world all along, but you will get better at being of service to others to the extent that you get good at loving yourself in this specific kind of way. All right, I think that's probably enough said about that by myself. And now I'm going to invite any or all of you, Manal and the rest, to make comments, ask questions, and turn this into a conversation instead of a monologue.
Yeah, thanks, Tabor. Thanks for all that. And just a reminder for folks on the Zoom call, if you want to ask a question, you can raise your hand and or type in the chat. And for those of you watching on Facebook, you can simply type something in the comments. And I have a question that came up for me, Tabor, while you were talking. And you alluded earlier to the fact that there's so much pain, there's so much suffering in the world. And I'm wondering, you know, how do I open myself up to that without it being crushing or debilitating? You know, my default is I just want to shut it off. I haven't watched the news since the election. I don't want to deal with anything. But how do I stay open, even when being open is really, really painful?
Yeah, that's a great question. Couple of things about that. First of all, I have a little model that is like about your zones, your various zones. This is 3 concentric circles. If this inner circle is your comfort zone, where you go for coping, where you go for comfort, where you go for relaxation. We've all heard about our comfort zone. And then outside of that is another circle that's called your stretch zone. out there is not so comfortable. You're at the edge of your capacities, you're stretching. And then outside of that is another circle I call the crisis zone or the emergency zone. So I think part of the art of living, part of the art of what I call pacing yourself, is by consciously being able to go into your comfort zone and then journey out into your stretch zone and then cycle back into your comfort zone and go back out into your stretch zone with as few trips as possible out into the crisis emergency zone where you just kind of blow yourself out and are no good to anybody. So, we, on the one hand, we have to pace ourselves and be realistic about like, okay, I need to go on retreat right now and not worry about Donald Trump or the world or whatever. I need to turn inward and connect with myself, with my source, whatever, in order to be useful in those other ways. Or I need to focus on healing myself more right now at this period of my life than on trying to be of service to others. I think it was Mother Teresa that said, if you really want to work with the poor and be of service, you better get grounded in God first. And of course, you can use the G word however you want. I don't, I use it in a metaphorical sense, but you got to pace yourself and there is no right rhythm for that. There is no one size fits all for that. I personally have spent big chunks of my life as kind of a hermit, and I don't regret that. Now, in the middle of my hermitude, it didn't look like I was being much good to anybody else. And yet, now I travel all over the world and touch people's lives in many countries and do this beautiful stuff through modern technology where I get to talk to people in other countries and stuff. So now, at this moment, it seems like I'm being able to touch a lot of people and it feels wonderful. But at other times, I lived in a Zen center. I went on all these 10-day silent retreats. And my Zen teacher used to say, we retreat in order to advance. So you got to pace yourself. That's the first point. The second one is, this is just my personal formulation, but I figure that the real possibility and opportunity of being a human is learning how to love. And love is greatly misunderstood. Love doesn't mean fluffy clouds and rainbows and unicorns and all its sweetness. Love means that willingness, that openness that can embrace all of it, the light and the dark, that can find the sweetness right in the middle of the suffering. That's compassion. The word compassion means to suffer with. So to really have developed the muscle of compassion is to not be afraid of suffering, to not be afraid of pain, to not be afraid of the darkness. And that's challenging, frankly. When I first started being a counselor, I was in an agency where I had all kinds of hard luck cases. I had the paranoid Vietnam vet who was like completely traumatized by his war experience, or the woman who was coming in and being regularly battered by her husband but wouldn't leave him. And to just sort of be with that unflinchingly brings up pain and like, oh, fuck, it shouldn't be this way, or some kind of inner protest to that kind of suffering. And yet somehow we have to find our inner yes, even to that. Yes, I can take this in. Yes, you find some kind of acceptance. Now, the acceptance that you find includes accepting how much you want to change this, how much you'd like to see it be different. But if you can't grieve and you can't accept what actually already is, then you're not effective in terms of helping it become something else. And that capacity grows over time to where you become less and less afraid of suffering, less and less afraid of pain, less and less resistant to it. And then your emotional metabolism is not just internal, it's with others, it's in the world. I actually, this may sound weird, but I enjoy, on some level, sitting with people who are in a lot of pain and going through something. And I know that I can help them metabolize that. I can help them move through it in a way that they can come out the other side and feel stronger than they did before. And that's an honor to me. That's a gift. And it's a little harder to look at the world as a whole and see how messed up it is. But there too, you can look at it, you can feel your pain, you can grieve the mess that humanity has made for itself, and then you can sort of say, okay, what can I do? How can I contribute? How can I be a force for something different in the world?
Thanks, Tabor. Thank you for that. Robert has a question, and I'm going to bring him on next. There we go.
Hey there, Robert.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well.
Good. So I'm new to your work. You mentioned you do things with communication, and this is part of the process of dealing with this stuff. So I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about that.
Yes. I teach under the titles of revolutionary relating or radical honesty. And basically, for me, part of the art of being that I was talking about, part of the art of personal transformation is using communication as an out loud, interpersonal, interactive meditation or awareness practice. So, as I said, I spent a lot of time living in a Zen center and doing meditation. And then I trained as a psychotherapist. And then I started doing all the touchy-feely workshops because I noticed that in the spiritual world, people tended to be a little uncomfortable with all of what I call the messy, juicy stuff of life, the stuff below the neck, or awareness practice. That was weird. I just heard my own echo. And so I got interested in psychotherapy and all these touchy-feely groups, and I noticed that there was a different blind spot in that area, which is where they tend to get caught up in the content of their own drama and believe in their stories. So then I became interested in how can these things be integrated? How can you use communication as a spiritual practice, as an out loud meditation? So that's what I've been actually totally devoted to and geeking out on for like 30 years. And I've learned a lot about it, and I love teaching it. And in a nutshell, it becomes about getting good at really noticing what's going on with you, noticing your own experience like you would through meditative practice, and then getting good at naming that out loud, communicating it to another person in the moment, not having a conversation about stuff, but having a conversation where you are naming what you notice right now to another person and having them hear you and having this kind of a conscious conversation that allows all of this experience to move. It allows that process of what I was calling emotional metabolism. Because most of the time, everybody is spontaneously having an experience. And much of the experience that they're spontaneously having, they don't like. Not consciously, perhaps, but on some level, they're having an experience and they're resisting it. No, not that. And so they're engaging in what I call sensation management strategies. They're like trying to feel better through this or that or this or this, trying to escape from this experience that's arising spontaneously. So whether it's solo meditation or whether it's this interpersonal meditation of revolutionary relating and radical honesty, then they are choosing to intentionally experience the experience, lean into it. That requires the kind of love that I was talking to Manal about. That requires a willingness to embrace the discomfort that can come with that. But over time, your willingness and your capacity grows, your honesty and openness grows, your shame starts shedding, your fear starts dissolving, and you become more and more honest and open and self-aware and compassionate. So I think it's a really, really powerful practice, especially for our day and age. You know, there was spiritual practices for thousands of years that were more about solitude and inner work. And I still think that that's very important as a foundation. But now I think it's time that we can really start creating spiritual interpersonal work, and that's what I'm fascinated with. And the Zen teacher, the Vietnamese Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh said, "The Buddha's coming back, but the next time the Buddha comes back, the Buddha will be a community. The Buddha will be a sangha. It won't just be an individual." So, yeah, that's a whole subject. Going to be traipsing all over Europe this summer, teaching retreats and courses in that work. So, you know, I'd love to have you come join us. Check out the website. I'll teach some more of it here in the U.S. in the fall, but that's my way of trying to heal the world.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Manal, you're on mute.
There we go. Thank you. Next, we've got Roman. And let me just unmute Roman, and you can go ahead and ask your question. There you go. Roman, can you hear us?
Yeah, I do. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Come on.
Hey. Yeah, I loved what you said about believe in their stories when you were explaining about the caught up in their trauma thing, because I didn't fully understand the difference between this Zen kind of approach and the touchy-feely, because right now I'm most exploring the touchy-feely stuff, and I imagine it's what's going on with me very often. I get caught up, and every time I explore my trauma or some sadness, I just I kind of victimize myself, and I'm like, oh, I'm so I need chocolate, I need a McDonald's or something.
Yeah, well, another way of talking about that is that the spiritual bypass, as they sometimes call it, involves being overly detached, being kind of remote or removed from the experience. You know, you get kind of clinical, and it's sort of like, oh, well, that's just a story, or that's not real, or this way of kind of dissociating from the intimacy with your own experience. On the other hand, what I would call the dramatic, the pitfall of drama is getting overly engrossed with the content of your suffering. Like, oh, I'm suffering because this and this and this, and yes, of course, life is shit for me because this and this and this. And so you're more engrossed in the content of your suffering than able to observe the process of it. Oh, here's how I am making myself suffer. That's why in Buddhism, a very common theme and question is, how am I creating suffering for myself right now? Now, if you do that well, you ask that question compassionately, not with this kind of overly detached clinical attitude. My Zen teacher used to say, whatever arises in meditation, see if you can neither fight it nor feed it. Don't feed it and don't fight it. So if you're fighting it, you're trying to distance yourself from this experience. I don't want this experience. It's not good, or I judge this as wrong, or let me change the subject, or let's go get drunk, or whatever your thing is of trying to push away the experience. On the other hand, if you're feeding it, that means you're sort of like feeding it stories, feeding it beliefs like, oh yes, it is so shitty what happened to you, blah, blah, blah. And you're not noticing that those are just thoughts that you're generating in the moment. And you start believing your own press, so to speak, believing your own bullshit about why life is shitty. The truth is, there is no life is shitty. The truth is, and now we're going to get radical, there is no the world is messed up. We can also look out and say the world is amazing. The world is beauty. It's all relative. It's all true and not true. And of course, the experience of looking out at the world and being pained by what you see, now that's real. That's understandable. But you have to take responsibility for the process of interpreting and the process of creating whatever kind of reactions you have to your environment. Not to try to control them, not to make them wrong, not to try to fix them, but just to own them. Oh, and today I'm feeling depressed or angry or sad about the state of the world or the state of myself. I'm going to bring my love to that. I'm going to observe that. I'm going to metabolize that.
I wonder if I understood the approach right. So you just kind of, you feel the pain, you're willing to feel it as much as you feel it, and it's not that important why is it there. It's just there.
Yeah. For instance, if you are in pain, then I say start with your body. Start by noticing the actual sensations in your body. Now, this is not something that most people want to do at all. Most people are cut off from their bodies and unconsciously want to remain cut off from their bodies. Whereas the approach that I'm suggesting is the opposite. You start being more and more willing to actually stay with the sensations that are arising in you in the midst of whatever experience, whether it's a pleasurable one or a painful one. And you start to get very specific, not just like, oh, I'm in pain, but actually, wow, there's a tightness in my solar plexus and tension across my chest, and my breath is kind of shallow, and my armpits are sweating, and I feel my heart beat, and there's tension in my forehead. And you start really noticing the elements of your physical sensational experience and being willing to be with them. And then along with that comes thoughts, oh, this sucks, I hate it, or why is this happening to me? Other people have better lives than me, or whatever. Thoughts come along with them. And your job is to notice the thoughts, but not believe in them. Like you're watching leaves float by on a stream. Oh, very interesting. A thought about how unfair life is. But you notice it. You don't push it away. You don't try to, oh, that's a shitty thought to have. Nor do you believe it and cling it close. You just sort of like, oh, yeah, thoughts about injustice, the unfairness of the world, You have compassion for, I call it compassionate awareness for your whole experience. The sensations, the images, the words or voices in your head, you watch all that. You watch all that as compassionately and patiently and kindly as you can, without getting hooked by it, without believing it. And that's where this communication practice can become so powerful, because we can support each other in doing that. We can start to say, oh, I'm feeling, that tension across my chest, tightness in my solar plexus, and I'm having thoughts about how I'm screwed up, or, or life is unfair, or something like that. And that other person can witness you and say, I hear you, and I notice myself wanting to try to fix you. I'm having thoughts about how I can help, and I'm getting kind of tight in my chest. Whatever it looks like, there's a whole art to these kinds of conscious conversations, but they're another support to this work of practicing compassionate awareness in the moment and emotional metabolism.
Thank you.
Thanks,
You're
Roman.
most welcome.
All right, Tabor, so just a time check. We're coming up on the hour, so I think we've got time for one or maybe two more questions. And I wanted to go to one from the internet, which gets to something you were saying in your lecture. And the question is, how do I know when I'm doing from an inspired place versus when I'm doing from a fearful or frantic place? What are the signs?
That is a great question. Thank you for that question. For one thing, do you feel like you need to get into action? Or can you pause before you spring into action? Again, referring to my Zen teacher, back many years ago when I was first starting to learn to meditate, I would get fidgety, sit down, and the intention, of course, is to sit perfectly still. And suddenly, like, oh, there's an itch over here, there's an itch over there, I got to adjust my pants just right, it's uncomfortable, the pillow's not quite right, and I get fidgety and have a hard time sitting still. And so I went to my Zen teacher and I said, oh, this is terrible, I'm trying to sit still, but then I get all fidgety, and so then I either end up moving all the time or trying not to move and being just like, oh, I'm gonna. And he said, well, neither one is the solution, in a Zen kind of fashion. He said, why don't you try sitting with the intention of sitting still, and then notice when an itch arises. And if the itch arises, pay attention to it. What does the itch actually feel like? How big is it? What's the size or shape of it? Or what's the texture of it? Feel it and see if by being with it for a while, it dissolves and goes away. Sometimes they do. If it doesn't, or it grows stronger, then continue feeling that itch and reach for the itch in slow motion and give it a slow motion scratch, and notice how scratching that itch feels and then slowly withdraw your hand and keep paying attention. Notice what's happening now. And I applied that to great effect and learned to then sit perfectly still over time. But it was a huge teaching for me about not just sitting still, but about life. Because most of the time we have all of these impulses, these fears and needs inside that we are basically run by, oppressed by. It's sort of like I feel something and it's an itch scratch. I feel something else, itch scratch, itch scratch. Like I've got to do something right away to fix the itch. Whereas if you can slow your experiencing down, you notice the impulse and then there's some space around it. You say, well, does scratching that right now serve me or not? I don't have to scratch it. Yeah, I think I'll try scratching it and see how it helps. Oh, yeah, that helped a lot. Or, no, actually, that just kind of made it worse. I think I need to stop and sit with the itch some more. So, in answer to your question, the first thing is, are you compulsively scratching when you are doing your doing? Or can you kind of wait in stillness or in silence long enough to receive your next inspiration about what needs to be done? And another aspect of it is, in my experience, when you're engaged in really inspired doing, it's just kind of naturally rewarding. It carries you along. It feels like stepping into the flow, Like when I'm doing these calls, it feels pretty effortless. It feels like falling off a log. It feels like, yes, I'm born for this. This is natural to me. Or ironically, when I'm sitting with someone who might be in deep pain, other people will say like, oh God, that sounds so depressing. But to me, it's not. It's enriching. It's rewarding. It's naturally motivating. It feels like I don't have to exert a lot of effort to make something happen. On the other hand, if your doing feels really effortful, like, oh God, I'm going to force myself to do this, that's not necessarily, but a good indication that it may be an uninspired doing. I mean, sometimes your inspired doing means like, I'm going to push myself over the top of this hill, and that still feels right to you. But in general, I like to go for doing that feels more and more like following the path of least resistance rather than forcing something. And when you're doing that, it's naturally rewarding to you. Yes, I'm glad I did that. Yes, you don't feel, you may feel tired, but you feel satisfied, like you just, ate a good meal or like something, you're nourished by your own actions. I hope
That's perfect.
More clarity.
Thanks for that, Tabor. And we've got time for one more question. And it's a broad one, also from the internet, also from Facebook. And it ties a little bit to the Soul Purpose course and what you're teaching there. And the question is, how do I figure out what I'm supposed to be doing? How am I supposed to know?
Yeah. Well, dude, you need to be dude or dudette. I love to have you in our next edition of the Soul Purpose course, which we are doing right now, but which we'll offer again in the fall, because we spend a whole lot of time delving into these subjects. But kind of building on what I was just talking about, part of the art of being is not thinking you need to know what to do. Being willing to not do anything for as long as it takes. Now, that's kind of radical advice, and some people will be like, well, You know, I don't got time to just sit around. And everybody is going to have to find their own comfort zone and willingness to wait in that sense. But I'm radical in that regard. I reached a point in my life where I'd gotten my master's in psychology. I was building up my psychotherapy private practice. I bought a house. I was remodeling it. I was doing all these responsible young man kinds of things that I thought I should do. And at some point I realized, oh, this is drudgery for me. This is not fun. I'm just kind of like doing what I think I should do. And it does not feel like inspired doing to me. And I had learned enough of what I'm talking to you about that I couldn't avoid seeing the problem with that. So I said to myself, well, self, there's nothing you should do. There's no way you're supposed to be. What do you want to do? And at first that looked like letting everything go. I rented out my house and moved into a tiny shoebox studio in an attic from a friend of mine that just cost me a couple $100 a month. And I let my private practice eke along at a very minimal level, which is all I needed to pay for my $200 a month studio. And I was living on rice and beans. And I started just asking myself, well, what do you really want? What are you really inspired to do? And frankly, it was a little bit of a scary time because for a while it just had experiences of like, well, I thought this was important. Is this what I want? No, falls away. How about this? Let's do, no. And things were just sort of falling away. And I was left with this kind of void. I spent a lot of time looking out the window or taking another walk through the park and just kind of being with myself and being with the stuff that was coming up that needed to be healed or listened to and stuff like that. And I got scared that there was nothing I would be passionate about. There was nothing I truly wanted to do. And yet, after long enough in this little dark night of the soul, I did get inspired. I got inspiration like, you know what? I need community. I'm living in my hometown and I'm lonely and I don't like it here anymore. I need community. And you know what? My whole life is about this spiritual work or this transformational practice. And I need to surround myself with other people who have a similar passion so that, again, I don't feel lonely. And I set out on a 10,000-mile road trip and I visited different spiritual communities, intentional communities all over the country. And after coming back home from that, a few months later, I shortly thereafter moved to one of those communities, and it's kind of led to everything else in my life since. So that was a long answer, but what I'm getting at is, first of all, you got to be willing to not know what to do and be willing to cut through the belief that you should be doing anything. Yeah, you got to, feed yourself. Yeah, you got to take care of the bare necessities of life. Although, as my example shows, you can also significantly reduce your necessities of life. I learned the art of living on no money and in a voluntary simplicity and low overhead strategy until I got inspired, like, what am I really up to? So that's part of it. Another part of it is you notice that voice in your head that's saying, what should I do? What should I do? What should I do? Is this right? Is that right? That voice is not helpful. That voice is fear talking. So you need to be willing to hear that voice and not answer it, not believe it. That's another one of those leaves floating by on the stream that I was talking to Roman about. And if you can let some of those more anxious voices die away, then sometimes inspiration will come in and it will feel different. Oh, I think I'd like to do that. And you think of it and you get excited. You get a kind of a movement. Yes, it's naturally motivating to you. So you have the experience of doing what you want, not what you should. What you actually feel inspired, what motivates you, what calls you forth. I hope that's clear.
Beautiful.
And I know we're over an hour, but if anybody else has a burning question, I'm still here a little bit longer, but make it quick. I know Manal's ready to wrap us up.
Well, I think we're all caught up on questions, just taking one more look. But Tabor, is there anything you want to say to wrap us up for today and on this topic for now?
Yes. We've been engaged in the doing, the hopefully inspired doing of this conversation, which I am grateful to you for. And once again, let's relax into the being which holds it. Let yourself feel yourself right now, right where you are. Feel the aliveness in your own body, the expansions, the contractions, the warmth, the coolness, the tingling, the heaviness, the lightness. Feel the existence, the experience of aliveness in your body in this moment. And notice what kinds of thoughts are going through your mind, if any, usually in the form of words or voices, sometimes in the form of pictures. Notice what's here. And let us trust that the universe is evolving on its own in whatever way it needs to. And even if we humans fuck things up pretty good sometimes, that's all part of the universal evolutionary experiment too. We are not outside nature. We are an aspect of nature. Now, we can evolve more gracefully or evolve through, banging our head against the wall. And of course, I would wish the former for us rather than the latter. But let's try to first embrace everything exactly as it is and trust that by bringing this kind of compassionate awareness to exactly what is and what's unfolding right now, we can actually help support, unleash and support the forces of evolution that want to happen in us and through us and in the world. That's been my experience, for which I am deeply grateful. That's been my experience of working with other people. That's the experience I wish for you.
Excellent. Thank you, Tabor. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And we'll put a recording of this call up on the website. I went ahead and put the link in the chat. And look forward to seeing you all next month on our next call.
Yes. May we all spread more love in the world by finding more love for ourselves and then letting it ripple outward. Bye.